Thalia Voss squinted at the blinking red light on the control console like it was a personal insult. Of course, it was just another Tuesday in the hellhole that was Selene 9, but the blinking was particularly obnoxious today, kind of like the universe flipping her the bird. "Someday," she muttered, fiddling with the unyielding buttons, "someday I'm gonna tear this place down with my bare hands." "Make sure to invite me when you do," came a voice from behind. Taran Slade, Selene 9's self-appointed morale officer, otherwise known as the person who doesn't shut up. He leaned against the doorway with the kind of cocky nonchalance that suggested he'd already resigned himself to the colony's inevitable doom. "What's broken this time?" "What's not?" Thalia shot back, pointing at the console with a screwdriver like a frustrated conductor. "We're down to half power, the water recycler's making ominous noises, and this damn thing thinks it's time for a disco." "Great," Taran replied with a mock cheerfulness that could only come from someone who'd fully embraced the absurdity of their situation. "I've always wanted to starve in a strobe-lit wasteland. Really sets the mood. Just another day on the armpit of the universe." Selene 9 was the kind of place where dreams went to die, buried under gray lunar dust, but it was home, or at least the closest thing to it when Earth decided those pesky moon colonists were a budget cut waiting to happen. "You know," Thalia grumbled, "I didn't sign up for this. I thought I'd be building colonies, not babysitting a glorified junkyard." "Look on the bright side," Taran said. "At least you're not one of the unlucky bastards on the night shift. Heard they found a new species of fungus growing in the hydroponics bay. Fungus, parasites, what's next? Carnivorous dandelions." "Don't tempt fate," Taran grinned. "She's the only one working harder than you are." Just as Thalia was about to deliver what she imagined would be the wittiest comeback ever, the comms unit crackled to life. "Thalia, you there? We've got a situation in the medbay." It was Dr. Kaido, sounding more frazzled than usual, which was saying something. If Selene 9 had a face, it would look like Kaido's perpetually worried frown. "What's up, Doc?" Thalia asked, leaving the console to its existential crisis. "You need to see this." "Bring Taran." "Now I'm really worried," Taran said, pushing off the wall and following Thalia through the narrow corridors of Selene 9. "If they're calling you in, it must be bad. Or maybe they just need a human sacrifice," Thalia quipped. The medbay smelled like antiseptic and desperation, the latter being in ample supply these days. "Doctor." Kaido was hunched over a microscope, his fingers tapping a nervous rhythm on the table. "Look at this," he said, motioning them over. Thalia peered into the eyepiece, half expecting to see something familiar, but what swam into focus was a writhing mass of what looked suspiciously like. "Is that an alien slug?" "Parasite," Kaido corrected, rubbing his eyes as if he could erase the image from his mind. "We found it on Jenkins after he passed out in the hydroponics bay." "Passed out, huh?" Taran leaned in, intrigued. "Please tell me it's not contagious. I'm running low on good excuses to avoid work." "Actually," Kaido said, his voice tinged with reluctant awe, "it's done something unexpected." Thalia crossed her arms, skeptical. "Unexpected how?" Jenkins woke up claiming he could see through walls. Taran snorted. "And did the walls have anything to say back?" Kaido ignored him, focusing instead on the serious part. "I ran some tests. His vitals are off the charts. Increased strength, heightened senses. Imagine what this could mean if it can be controlled." Thalia was not impressed. "And if it can't?" "We've seen enough horror movies to know where this goes." "Could mean we finally get some peace and quiet around here," Taran suggested. "If everyone's too busy being dead." Thalia pinched the bridge of her nose, willing away the headache that threatened to add to her growing list of grievances. "So what's the plan?" "The plan," Kaido said, his eyes gleaming with a mix of dread and excitement, "is to figure out how to harness this." Thalia looked at Taran, who just shrugged. "Guess it beats fixing the water recycler." "Yeah," Thalia sighed, mentally preparing herself for the shitshow that was sure to follow. But only slightly. As they left the medbay, the corridors seemed narrower, the lights dimmer. The weight of the moon's abandoned dreams pressed down on them like a forgotten god's grudge. Nothing good ever came easy, and in Selene 9, nothing good ever came at all. Taran broke the silence as they walked. "Think we'll live long enough to regret this?" "Probably," Thalia replied, a grin tugging at her lips despite everything. "But at least we'll have a hell of a story." And in Selene 9, that was as close to hope as anyone dared get. They were engineers, dreamers, fools, all of them dancing on the edge of oblivion with nothing but sarcasm and stubbornness to keep the darkness at bay. Back at her station, Thalia sat down heavily, the chair creaking in protest. She stared at the console, the red light blinking in perfect rhythm to her thoughts. The parasite was both a miracle and a menace, just like the colony itself. A double-edged sword waiting to spill blood, theirs or otherwise. "You know," Taran said from across the room, "sometimes I wonder if the universe is just one big cosmic joke and we're the punchline." Thalia chuckled dryly. "If that's true, we're doing a bang-up job of keeping it entertained." They worked in silence for a while, the only sound the hum of machinery and the occasional curse when something invariably went wrong. But there was a comfort in the chaos, a camaraderie born from shared misery. In Selene 9, you learned to laugh at absurdity because the alternative was just too damn depressing. And so they continued, trying to stave off the inevitable for another day. Because in a place where everything was broken and nothing was certain, sometimes survival was the biggest victory of all. The alarm blared suddenly, a shrill reminder that nothing stayed peaceful for long. Thalia slapped the console, trying to shut it up. "Now what? Looks like Jenkins is taking his new abilities for a joyride," Taran said, skimming the alert on his data pad. "He's in the reactor room." "Of course he is," Thalia muttered, already on her feet and heading for the door. "Because why wouldn't he be?" They hurried through the corridors, the grimy walls closing in like a bad omen. The reactor room was a place of last resort, the beating heart of Selene 9. If Jenkins wanted to go out with a bang, he'd certainly chosen the right place. When they arrived, Jenkins was standing in front of the reactor, eyes wide with whatever alien-induced epiphany had seized him. "I can feel it," he murmured, voice tinged with reverence. "The power, it's alive." "Jenkins," Thalia called cautiously, edging closer. "You need to step away from the reactor." He turned to them, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. "Don't you see? We're not meant to be trapped here. This is our salvation." "Salvation or a shortcut to a crater," Taran added unhelpfully. Thalia shot him a look, then focused on Jenkins. "Think about what you're doing. Do you really want to blow us all back to Earth in tiny pieces?" Jenkins hesitated, the rational part of him struggling against whatever madness the parasite was whispering in his ear. I want to be free." "We all do," Thalia said softly, taking a slow step forward. "But this isn't the way, Jenkins. We'll find a solution together." There was a tense moment where it could have gone either way, glorious revolution or catastrophic failure. But finally, Jenkins stumbled back, the light fading from his eyes, leaving only confusion and fear. Thalia caught him as he sagged, relief washing over her like a long-forgotten melody. "Easy there," she said, supporting him. "We've got you." Taran exhaled loudly, tension leaving his body in a rush. "Well, that was fun. Let's never do it again." "Seconded," Thalia agreed, managing a weary smile. "But knowing us, it's only a matter of time." They escorted Jenkins back to the medbay, plans forming in Thalia's mind. The parasite was a problem, but maybe it was also the key to their survival. They just had to figure out how to control it before it controlled them. "Think we'll ever catch a break?" Taran asked as they headed back to the control room. "Probably not," Thalia replied, glancing at the faint glow of Earth in the distance. "But hey, at least we're not bored." And that in the end was all that mattered. Finding some semblance of meaning in a universe that seemed hell-bent on laughing at their expense. In Selene 9, they'd keep fighting, keep hoping, and most importantly, keep laughing. Because sometimes that was the only weapon they had. As the doors slid shut behind them, the colony settled into its restless rhythm, a fragile bubble of humanity against the indifferent void. And in the silence that followed, Thalia couldn't help but wonder what the next chapter of their cosmic comedy would bring. Probably nothing good. But whatever it was, she'd be ready. Selene 9, a beacon of humanity's hubris, or just a forgotten rock where people like Thalia Voss tried to make sense of malfunctioning tech and malfunctioning colonists. Take your pick. With the alien parasite discovery, the place was buzzing with more questionable excitement than a drunken rat race. Thalia leaned against the console, watching the red light blink like it was sending Morse code for abandon hope. The incident with Jenkins was just the appetizer. The main course was more of a buffet, and it wasn't long before the rest of Selene 9's finest started showing symptoms of extraterrestrial hijacking. First up was Cassian Drex, the colony's so-called leader, though his leadership skills mostly involved yelling louder than anyone else. Word had it he was in the mess hall, giving a speech about intergalactic destiny to anyone who'd listen. The parasite had done wonders for his public speaking. Pity it hadn't improved his content. Thalia nudged Taran as they made their way through the narrow corridors. How much you want to bet this goes south faster than a meteor in a vacuum, with Drex involved? I'd bet my last ration of coffee, Taran replied. Maybe the parasite will improve his sense of humor. One can dream, Thalia said as they entered the mess hall. Drex was in his element, standing on a table like a preacher at the end of the world, eyes sparkling with fervor, an effect of the parasite, no doubt. We are chosen, he proclaimed, arms wide like he was about to take flight. To transcend our earthly bounds, or crash and burn, Thalia muttered, arms crossed as she watched the spectacle. Taran leaned in close, voice low. Think we should interrupt before he convinces everyone to join a cult? Probably, Thalia sighed. It's either that or let him talk himself to death. She stepped forward, raising her voice to cut through Drex's sermon. Cassian, mind coming down from your soapbox before you fall and break something? Drex paused, blinking as if coming out of a trance. Thalia, perfect timing. I was just explaining how the parasites are a gift. Gift or curse, they're causing more trouble than they are worth, Thalia shot back. Let's have a chat about this somewhere a bit less public. He hesitated, the crowd's eyes on him. The parasite might have given him powers, but Thalia's no-nonsense glare was a force of nature all its own. Fine, he relented, stepping down with all the grace of a drunk ballerina. As they left the mess hall, Taran looked back at the colonists, most of them sporting expressions of confusion mixed with reluctant hope. Well, that was inspiring, he said dryly. Better than watching paint dry, I suppose, Thalia responded. In the cramped office that served as Drex's headquarters, Thalia wasted no time. What's the plan, Cassian? You can't just go around preaching like some sort of messiah when we're on the brink of a meltdown. Drex rubbed his temples, the glow in his eyes dimming like a fading light bulb. I know it sounds crazy, but this might be what we need. Our situation here was already dire. Dire doesn't begin to cover it, Taran added. But if this goes wrong, we're toast. Thalia leaned forward, her voice firm. We need to understand these parasites before we jump to conclusions. Weaponizing them might just backfire spectacularly. It's a risk, Drex conceded. But what choice do we have? Earth's forgotten us. We're on our own, which is exactly why we can't afford to gamble, Thalia said. We need to find out where these parasites came from and if there's any way to control them. Easier said than done, Taran quipped. Unless you've got a secret lab hidden behind the water recycler, Thalia smirked. No secret lab, but we've got Kaido. He'll know what to do, the mention of Doctor. Kaido brought a flicker of hope to Drex's eyes. All right, Thalia, you take point on this. Find out what makes these parasites tick and see if there's any way to harness their power safely. Roger that, Thalia said, already plotting their next move. As they left Drex's office, Taran shook his head. It's like we're in a bad sci-fi movie. All we need now is a mad scientist and a ticking clock. We've got the scientist, Thalia replied. And knowing our luck, the clock's already ticking. Back in the medbay, Kaido was knee-deep in alien biology, surrounded by samples and data that made Thalia's head spin just looking at them. "Got anything for us, Doc?" she asked. Kaido glanced up, eyes tired but focused. "The parasites are complex, more than anything I've ever seen. But there's potential here. If we can control it, it could be revolutionary, and if we can't," Taran pressed. "Then we're looking at a complete system collapse," Kaido said, ever the optimist. Thalia blew out a breath, trying not to let the frustration show. "So where do we start?" Kaido tapped a few keys, bringing up a series of scans. "I've isolated some of the parasites' genetic markers. If we can manipulate them, we might be able to suppress the more aggressive tendencies. Sounds like a plan," Thalia said, though she knew it was more of a stab in the dark than a sure thing. "You'll need to gather some data from the source," Kaido continued, "which means getting back into the hydroponics bay. Safely this time." "Great," Taran said, rubbing his hands together. "I've always wanted to risk my life for a plan. With a new sense of purpose or desperation, take your pick." Thalia and Taran made their way to the hydroponics bay. The air was thick with humidity and the faint, unsettling scent of alien flora. "Think this is where they've been hiding out?" Taran asked, peering at the rows of plants with suspicion. "Wouldn't be surprised," Thalia replied, scanning the area. "Let's get what we need and get out." They moved cautiously, collecting samples and trying not to think too hard about the implications. The plants loomed in the dim light, silent witnesses to humanity's eternal dance with disaster. "Got it," Thalia said finally, holding up the sample container. "Let's hope Kaido can work his magic." They were almost to the exit when a rustling sound stopped them short. Taran groaned. "Of course there's more. Why wouldn't there be?" From behind a cluster of particularly ominous-looking ferns, a figure emerged. It was Jenkins, looking worse for wear but very much alive. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low and strained. "It's dangerous. Tell us something we don't know," Thalia shot back, wary eyes on Jenkins. "What are you doing here?" "I can feel them," Jenkins said, the glow flickering in his eyes. "There. Singing, calling me." Taran exchanged a look with Thalia. "I'm guessing that's not a good thing." "Depends on your definition of good," Thalia murmured. "Jenkins, we need you to come back with us. Kaido's working on a way to help." Jenkins laughed, a sound like dry leaves in the wind. "There is no help. Only change. Change or annihilation," Taran muttered under his breath. Thalia held up the sample container, trying a different tactic. "This could be the key, Jenkins. We need your help to figure this out." He hesitated, torn between the alien call and the lingering threads of humanity. "All right," he said at last, voice heavy with resignation. "But if this goes wrong?" "If things go wrong," Taran interrupted, "we'll just say I told you so and accept our Darwin Award." With Jenkins in tow, they made their way back to the medbay. The corridors felt more oppressive by the minute, the weight of Selene Nine's forgotten promises pressing down on them. Kaido was waiting, a mixture of relief and trepidation on his face as they entered. "You got it?" he asked, eyeing the sample. "Yeah, and a bonus," Thalia said, gesturing to Jenkins. "Welcome back to the land of the living, Jenkins," Kaido said, though his gaze was already fixed on the sample. "I hear it's overrated," Jenkins replied, slumping into a chair. Kaido got to work immediately, running tests and muttering under his breath. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent countdown to whatever revelations, or disasters, awaited them. As they watched Kaido delve into the mysteries of alien biology, Thalia couldn't help but feel a grim camaraderie with her fellow colonists. They were all in this together, for better or worse, fighting against the odds in a place designed for failure. "Think they'll write songs about us?" Taran asked, breaking the silence. "If they do," Thalia replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips, "let's hope they're not dirges." Kaido straightened, pulling them from their thoughts. "I've found something," he said, his voice a mix of excitement and apprehension. "There's a chance we can manipulate the genetic structure to suppress the more dangerous aspects of the parasites." "Chance?" Taran echoed, skepticism coloring his tone. "It's better than nothing," Kaido snapped, more irritable than usual. Thalia nodded, feeling the weight of their precarious existence like a stone in her gut. "Do what you can, Kaido." We don't have any other options." As Kaido resumed his work, Thalia and Taran exchanged a glance. The road ahead was uncertain, but they'd always been good at navigating chaos. In Selene 9, chaos was the only constant. "Think we'll make it out of this?" Taran asked, a hint of genuine curiosity in his voice. "Not a clue," Thalia admitted, though there was a spark of defiance in her eyes. "But I'll be damned if I don't give it my best shot." And so they waited, caught between hope and despair, clinging to the fragile thread of human ingenuity in a universe that cared little for their survival. In the end, maybe that was the real adventure, not the destination, but the fight to get there, laughing in the face of oblivion all the way. Thalia squinted at the blinking console in the medbay, hoping that if she stared hard enough, it would stop looking like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. It was a long shot, but optimism had never been her strong suit. She sighed, muttering to herself, "If this thing starts sending out SOS signals, we're screwed." "You know," Taran chimed in from his precariously balanced stool, "this entire setup feels like some cosmic joke. Like, hey, here's a colony. Oh, and by the way, everything's broken. Enjoy." "You make it sound so inviting," Thalia shot back, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in her voice. "We should put that on the brochure." "I'm just saying," Taran continued, kicking his legs like a bored child, "Earth couldn't care less about us. We're like that potted plant in the corner of the office no one wants to water." Thalia nodded, her thoughts already drifting back to the task at hand. The parasites were an issue, sure, but the real problem was the one staring her in the face, the infected colonists. Or, as she preferred to think of them, the parasitically challenged individuals. Cassian Drex, with his newfound love for grand speeches, wasn't helping matters. His rousing talk about intergalactic destiny had left the colony divided. The infected were getting more fanatical by the day, and the uninfected were feeling the squeeze. "What's the plan, boss?" Taran asked, snapping her back to reality. "You gonna throw a party to unite us in our doomed existence?" Thalia rolled her eyes. "Yeah, and I'll serve parasitic hors d'oeuvres. No, we need to keep digging into these things before the infected decide to make us honorary members of their cult." As if on cue, the door slid open with an ominous hiss, revealing a trio of colonists with that telltale glow in their eyes. They didn't look like they were here for tea. "Thalia," the apparent leader said, his voice smoother than a used car salesman on commission, "we need to talk." "Does this conversation involve pitchforks and torches?" she asked, folding her arms. "Because I'm fresh out of patience and fire insurance." The leader chuckled, though there was no humor in it. "No, no, just a friendly reminder. Some of us are worried that your investigations might do more harm than good." "Funny," Taran interjected. "We were just discussing how playing with alien parasites could be the feel-good story of the year." Ignoring Taran's sarcasm, the leader pressed on. "Cassian has a vision for us, a future where these parasites make us better, stronger. You're jeopardizing that." "Right," Thalia said, her patience wearing thinner than the colony's budget. "And how's that utopia working out for you? Still having rave parties in the hydroponics bay?" The leader's face hardened. "This is your warning, Thalia. Stay out of it or else." "Or else what?" Taran asked, leaning forward with mock interest. "You'll bore us to death with more speeches." The leader turned on his heel, his entourage following like a pack of loyal, if slightly unhinged, dogs. Thalia watched them go, the tension in the air thick enough to slice with a laser scalpel. "Well, that was fun," Taran said once the door closed. "It's not every day you get a death threat with a side of cultish fervor." Thalia sighed. "We need to move faster. Kaido's making progress, but if they decide we're too much of a threat." Taran nodded. "Guess I'll start packing my bags. Just in case, we need a quick getaway." "Good idea," Thalia replied, moving to check on Kaido's progress. "And maybe pack some snacks. If we're going out, I want to do it on a full stomach." Back in the lab, Kaido was hunched over his console like a man possessed, oblivious to the world around him. "Got anything new, Doc?" Thalia asked, hoping for the miracle cure she knew was unlikely. Kaido looked up, dark circles under his eyes. I've managed to modify some of the genetic markers. It's unstable, but it might work. Define work, Taran said, leaning against a counter. Because if it's the kind of work that ends with us glowing like nightlights, I'm not interested. Potentially suppresses the parasite's more aggressive traits, Kaido explained, his fingers flying over the keys. But it's risky. I need more time. Time we might not have, Thalia said, her voice grim. The infected are getting bolder if Drex decides we're a threat. Can't you just throw a wrench in his speeches? Taran suggested. Like literally take a wrench and… Tempting, Thalia admitted, but I doubt it'll solve our problems. We need to keep our heads down and push forward. Kaido nodded, his focus already back on the screen. I'll do what I can, just watch your backs. Always, Thalia replied, feeling the weight of their precarious situation pressing down on her. We've got no choice. As they left the lab, the tension between the infected and uninfected was palpable, like a storm brewing on the horizon. It was only a matter of time before something snapped, and when it did, Thalia knew they'd be right in the eye of the hurricane. Think we'll survive long enough to find out how this ends? Taran asked, his voice light despite the heavy question. Survive, Thalia said, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Maybe. As for figuring out how this ends, well, I've always liked surprises. Taran chuckled, their footsteps echoing through the corridors like a countdown to whatever fate awaited them. In Selene 9, nothing was predictable except for the certainty that things would get worse before they got better. But then, that's what made life here so damn interesting. The next few days felt like they were trapped in a pressure cooker, the tension ratcheting up with each passing hour. Kaido continued his work in the lab, though progress was slower than a snail on tranquilizers. Meanwhile, Thalia found herself glancing over her shoulder more often than she cared to admit. The infected colonists were everywhere, watching with eyes that seemed to glow brighter with each passing day. It was like they knew something the rest of them didn't, a secret they were all too eager to keep to themselves. Any word from Earth? Thalia asked Taran one evening as they sat hunched over a console in the dimly lit mess hall. Nothing, Taran replied, stuffing a rather sad-looking piece of bread into his mouth. I'm guessing we're still not high on their priority list. Big surprise, Thalia muttered, picking at her own meal. It was a far cry from gourmet, but at least it was edible. We need to figure something out, and fast. Taran nodded, glancing around the room at the scattered groups of colonists, each huddled together like tribes in a forgotten world. Feels like we're living in a dystopian novel. We're one step away from developing our own dialect and tribal dances. Don't give them ideas, Thalia said, though the humor in her voice was forced. I don't think I can handle another one of Drex's dance recitals masquerading as a speech. The conversation died down as they finished their meals, the silence heavy with unspoken questions and uncomfortably loud chewing. Thalia knew they needed answers, and quickly, before things spiraled even further out of control. The next day she found herself back in the lab, watching Kaido work his magic, or attempt to anyway. The lab was cluttered with equipment and half-empty coffee cups, a testament to the doctor's tireless efforts to save them from themselves. Got anything for me? Thalia asked, leaning over his shoulder to peer at the screen. Kaido sighed, rubbing his temples. I'm close. I've managed to stabilize the compound, but I need a test subject. Test subject, Taran echoed from where he was perched on a counter, looking more like a gargoyle than a man at this point. I volunteer, Thalia. Ha ha, Thalia said dryly, rolling her eyes. No, seriously, Kaido, we don't have time for slow progress. If we don't act soon, Drex and his merry band of parasites will make the decision for us. I know, Kaido said, his voice tinged with frustration. But rushing this could be disastrous. Thalia was about to respond when the door to the lab burst open, and a group of infected colonists stormed in, eyes blazing with that unsettling glow. Leading them was Drex himself, his presence simultaneously commanding and deeply unnerving. Thalia, Drex said, his voice a peculiar blend of charisma and menace. I think it's time we had a little chat. Thalia kept her expression neutral, even as her mind raced with possible escape plans. About what? The weather. Because I have to say it's been gloomy. Enough with the jokes, Thalia, Drex said, though there was a hint of amusement in his eyes. I know what you're doing here, and it's time to stop. And what exactly am I doing? She asked, meeting his gaze with a steely determination. Trying to undermine the future of this colony, Drex replied, his voice carrying the weight of conviction. These parasites are our salvation, a new beginning for humanity, Taran snorted, earning him a glare from one of Drex's followers. Right, because being a glowing alien host is on everyone's bucket list. Drex ignored him, his attention focused squarely on Thalia. You need to accept what we are becoming, or you'll be left behind. Thalia's jaw tightened, her mind flashing through a dozen scenarios. And if I don't accept it, then you will be dealt with, Drex said simply, as if discussing the weather. We cannot have dissenters in our new society. There was a heartbeat of silence, the air crackling with tension. Thalia's thoughts were a jumble of defiance and fear, but one thing was clear. They couldn't let the infected take control. As if reading her mind, Taran hopped off the counter, his movements casual but his eyes sharp. Well, this has been a lovely chat, but I think it's time for us to go. Drex's followers shifted, blocking the doorway with a wall of determined bodies. I don't think so, one of them said, his voice a low growl. Guess it's time for Plan B, Thalia muttered under her breath, her mind racing for a solution. They couldn't fight their way out, not without causing a scene that would end badly for everyone involved. Plan B? Taran asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. Please tell me it involves a cunning escape and not us becoming alien snacks. Thalia's lips twitched in a thin smile. Something like that. Before she could elaborate, the lights flickered, casting the lab in alternating shadows and harsh fluorescent light. Kaido glanced up from his console, his expression one of concern mingled with determination. Now might be a good time to hit the emergency button, Kaido suggested, nodding toward a discreet panel on the wall. Thalia didn't need to be told twice. She lunged for the panel, her fingers slamming down on the controls just as the lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. The sudden change sent a ripple of confusion through Drex's followers, giving Thalia and Taran the opening they needed. Time to go, Taran said, grabbing Thalia's arm and pulling her toward the nearest exit. As they stumbled into the corridor, the emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Thalia's heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline surging through her veins as they sprinted down the hallway. What now? Taran asked, glancing over his shoulder to make sure they weren't being followed. Find somewhere safe, Thalia replied, her thoughts racing. And figure out how to turn the tide before Drex's utopia becomes a reality. They rounded a corner, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them like a sinister soundtrack to their escape. Thalia's mind was a whir of possibilities and dead ends, but one thing was clear. The fight was far from over, and they'd need every ounce of ingenuity they could muster to survive the days ahead. Thalia and Taran's mad dash through the dimly lit corridors of Selene 9 felt like a bizarre parody of a high-stakes race. They skidded around corners, narrowly avoided concussed colonists, and ducked under the kind of dangling wires that probably violated a dozen space safety regulations. You'd think they'd have a race track or something by now, Taran puffed, sprinting alongside her. With all these emergencies, it's practically mandatory cardio, right? Thalia replied, breathless but grinning despite herself. We can call it the Selene 9 Marathon. First prize, a one-way ticket back to Earth, Taran snorted. Second prize, you get to stay here forever with Drex and his merry band of zealots. They paused for a moment to catch their breath, backs pressed against the cold metal wall. The flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows, making the hallway look like it belonged in some horror vid, minus the comforting knowledge that it all ended in 10 episodes. How's Kaido doing with the magic potion? Taran asked, scanning the corridor as if it might attack them. Thalia shrugged, wiping sweat from her brow. He said he needs a test subject. I was hoping Drex would volunteer out of the kindness of his heart, but you know how it is with cult leaders. Kindness of his heart. The man's heart is as black as the coffee sludge they serve in the mess hall. Thalia nodded, glancing around nervously. We need to get back to the medbay. If Kaido can stabilize that compound, we might just have a fighting chance. Great, Taran said, pushing off the wall. All we need now is a good old-fashioned distraction. As if on cue, the entire structure shuddered, the sound of alarms blaring to life reverberating through the corridors. Thalia's stomach dropped as she realized what that meant. The water recycler, she muttered, eyes wide. It's finally given up the ghost. Taran rolled his eyes. Of course it has. Why maintain vital infrastructure when you can spend all your resources on self-righteous speeches? The two of them took off again, weaving through the chaos of colonists emerging from their quarters in various states of confusion and panic. The air was thick with tension and the unmistakable scent of fear, a heady cocktail that could make even the bravest soul question their life choices. They reached the medbay, bursting through the door to find Kaido hunched over his console, frantically typing as the occasional spark flew from the malfunctioning equipment. "Kaido," Thalia called, rushing over to him. "How's it looking?" "Bad," he said without looking up. "The recycler's about to blow, and when it does, we're all going to get up close and personal with our own bodily waste." "Charming," Taran said, joining them. "But we've got bigger problems." Kaido looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "Did you find a test subject?" "Not yet," Thalia said, biting her lip. "But we need to act fast. If Drex and his followers take over, they'll turn this place into a breeding ground." "Speaking of," Taran interrupted, nodding towards the door. "Looks like our fan club has arrived." The infected colonists spilled into the medbay, their eyes glowing with that eerie light that suggested they were either under alien influence or had discovered an unlimited supply of energy drinks. "Thalia Voss," said Drex, his voice cutting through the chaos like a laser scalpel. "It's time for you to see the truth of our transformation." "I'm more of a skeptic, thanks," Thalia replied, backing up slowly as Drex approached. "But hey, maybe a PowerPoint presentation would change my mind." Drex smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "There's no need for slides when you can experience it for yourself." "Kaido," Thalia hissed, her eyes darting between Drex and the console. "How much longer?" "As long as it takes," Kaido muttered, not looking up from his work. Taran shifted beside her, looking as if he were considering doing something reckless. "We need a miracle," he whispered. "No," Thalia said, determination hardening her voice. "We need a plan." She glanced at the control console, its blinking red light like a beacon of bad news. Inspiration struck her, the kind of desperate, last-minute inspiration that could either save them or doom them all. "Taran," she said, grabbing his arm, "can you draw their attention, just for a few minutes?" "Sure," Taran said with a lopsided grin. "I'll tell them a joke." Everyone loves a good stand-up routine during a crisis. As Taran moved forward, Thalia turned to Kaido, lowering her voice. "If I can get to the recycler controls, can we use it to flood the lower decks? It'll force them to retreat and give us time to fix this without interference." Kaido's eyes widened. "That's risky. If it backfires, we're dead anyway if we don't try," Thalia cut in. "Can it be done?" Kaido hesitated, then nodded. "I'll guide you remotely. But Thalia, if you fail..." "Let's not think about that," she said, steeling herself. Taran was already in full swing, telling some long-winded joke about a priest, a rabbi, and a malfunctioning hovercraft, his voice rising above the din. It was enough to distract Drex and his followers, if only briefly. Thalia darted to the console, fingers flying over the keys like a virtuoso with a death wish. She could feel Drex's eyes on her, the weight of his disapproval like a physical force, but she forced herself to focus. Come on," she muttered under her breath. The console's interface a mess of blinking lights and ominous error messages. She entered the commands, hoping against hope that she'd remembered the sequence correctly. A second passed, then another. Sweat trickled down her spine as she watched the screen, waiting for validation or condemnation. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and a deep rumble shook the colony. The water recycler roared to life, a cacophony of clanking and grinding echoing through the building as if the machine itself were protesting this reckless abuse. Drex's followers staggered, their focus broken as water began to pour into the lower levels, quickly rising to ankle height. The room filled with the sound of splashing and indignant shouting. "Time to go," Taran yelled, grabbing Thalia's arm once more. As they bolted for the exit, Thalia cast one last glance over her shoulder. Drex stood amidst the chaos, his expression a peculiar mix of fury and admiration. It was clear he hadn't expected her to take such drastic measures, and for a moment she almost pitied him. Almost. They stumbled into the corridor, the water sloshing around their feet as they made their way toward higher ground. The emergency lights flickered overhead, casting everything in a surreal red glow. "What's next?" Taran asked, his voice breathless but full of the kind of reckless optimism that had kept them alive so far. "We find a place to regroup," Thalia replied, her mind already racing with possibilities. "And then we figure out how to take Drex down for good." The gravity of their situation weighed heavily on her shoulders, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it. Not yet. They had a colony to save, and she wasn't about to let it fall to a bunch of parasite-worshipping zealots without a fight. They pressed on, the sound of their footsteps echoing through the desolate hallways like a heartbeat, a reminder that, for better or worse, they were still alive. For now. As they reached the upper levels, the water subsiding behind them, Taran cast her an approving look. "You, my friend, are the queen of improvisation." Thalia allowed herself a brief, wry smile. Desperation's a hell of a motivator. They paused in a small alcove, catching their breath as they listened for any sign of pursuit. But all they heard was the distant drone of machinery and the occasional shout from below. For the moment, they were safe. "What now?" Taran asked, his voice softer, more serious. Thalia exhaled slowly, her mind already working through the next steps. "We need to regroup with any uninfected colonists still willing to fight. If we can rally them, we might stand a chance. And if we can't," Taran pressed, his gaze steady on hers. "Then we find another way," she replied, her voice firm, resolved. "We're not giving up, not now." Taran nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Guess we're playing the long game then." "Seems like it," Thalia said, her mind a hive of plans and contingencies. "But we've always been good at making it up as we go along." They set off once more, their steps purposeful, determined. The future might be uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Thalia felt a glimmer of hope. They were still in the game, and as long as they were, there was a chance they could win. And in a place like Selene 9, that was more than enough to keep them going. Thalia and Taran trudged through the dimly lit corridors of Selene 9, their footsteps echoing off the walls like the monotonous ticking of a broken clock. The air was thick with the scent of fried circuits and desperation, a lovely combination that could make anyone reconsider their life choices, or lack thereof. "We're really in the deep end now," Taran remarked, wiping a mixture of sweat and debris from his brow. His eyes darted around, as if expecting the walls to grow teeth and swallow them whole. "And here I thought today was going to be boring." Thalia snorted, her mind a whirl of half-formed plans and the grim reality of their precarious situation. "Boring never was our style, was it? Now let's see if we can scrape together a miracle." "Right," Taran replied, "because miracles are just lying around here, like discarded ration packs." Their banter was a thin veneer over the gnawing anxiety that chewed at their insides. They needed a plan, and fast, or Drex, and his parasite-infested fanatics would have them all singing Kumbaya in some twisted alien harmonics. As if on cue, the station's PA system crackled to life, and Drex's voice oozed through the speakers like syrupy poison. "My brothers and sisters, the time is near. Our transformation will soon be complete. Embrace the unity, surrender to the light." Taran rolled his eyes so hard it was a wonder they didn't fall out. He's like an interstellar self-help tape someone lost the instructions to. Thalia shook her head, fighting the creeping dread that threatened to overwhelm her. We have to stop him. If he uses that gravity weapon, we'll all be flatter than a pancake. Right, Taran agreed, but his voice was tinged with something darker, a hint of resignation. But how? We're short on everything, especially time. First, we regroup, Thalia said, her voice firmer than she felt. Find any uninfected, see who's up for a last stand. If Drex wants to play God, he's gonna find out the hard way that we're not that easy to smite. Love the enthusiasm, Taran replied, sarcasm dripping from every word. Now if only enthusiasm could reverse gravity. They reached the next corridor, dimly lit like the rest, which seemed to be Selene 9's default setting. It was almost comforting if you liked living in a perpetual state of near blindness. A few colonists huddled together, their faces a mosaic of fear and confusion. Thalia took charge, addressing them with the authority of someone who hadn't yet realized she might be in over her head. We need fighters, not bystanders. If you want to keep breathing, you better start acting like it. One colonist, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms, spoke up. But Drex, he's got the weapon, and those things inside him. True, Thalia conceded. But what he doesn't have is a decent plan. He's all spectacle, no substance. And we have. Another colonist, a skinny woman with eyes like saucers, asked skeptically. A willingness to not die horribly, Taran interjected, grinning. And I'm told that counts for something. A few of them chuckled, the sound brittle but real. In a place where hope was rarer than a maintenance crew actually fixing something, laughter was a currency that might just keep them afloat. As they moved through the station, their numbers growing with each step, Thalia felt a small flicker of hope. It was fragile, like a candle in a hurricane, but it was there. Okay, team, she said, trying to channel the kind of confidence that could inspire rebellion or, at the very least, prevent mass hysteria. Here's the plan. We need to sabotage the gravity weapon before Drex can use it. I need volunteers willing to take a risk. There was a pause, the kind that stretched on forever. Then slowly, hands began to rise. A ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were misfits with heart. And sometimes heart was all you needed. That and maybe a damn good distraction. A loud crash echoed down the corridor, the kind of sound that usually accompanied the words, "We have a problem." Thalia's stomach twisted as Drex's voice boomed over the intercom again. Do not resist. Join us and become part of something greater. Greater than what? Taran quipped. A broken airlock. A half-eaten protein bar. Thalia forced herself to focus, even as panic threatened to claw its way to the surface. We need to move. We can't let Drex activate that weapon. If he does, we're all going to be molecular pancakes. They hurried on, the sound of their footsteps mingling with the distant thrum of the station's life support systems, systems that, judging by the flickering lights, were not exactly in their prime. As they turned a corner, they encountered another group of colonists, these ones looking as if they'd just stepped out of a horror vid. Their eyes were wild, pupils dilated to an unsettling degree. Looks like Drex's fan club, Taran muttered, eyeing them warily. Drex's voice came again, sickeningly sweet like honey laced with arsenic. Join us, Thalia. Your resistance is futile. Together we can achieve harmony. Thalia gritted her teeth. Harmony, my ass. More like a one-way trip to insanity. The infected colonists advanced, their movements unnaturally smooth, as if they were being guided by an unseen hand. Back off, Taran warned, brandishing a makeshift weapon he'd cobbled together from spare parts in pure desperation. Trust me, you don't want to mess with this. To his credit, Taran made a pretty convincing threat, but the infected were beyond reason, their minds tethered to Drex's twisted vision. We need a bottleneck, Thalia said, scanning their surroundings. Somewhere we can take them out without getting overrun. Taran pointed to a narrow passageway ahead, just wide enough for one or two people at a time. There. We can hold them off. They dashed for the passage, the infected close on their heels. As they reached the entrance, Thalia turned, her heart pounding in her chest like a war drum. It was now or never. "Hold them here," she ordered, her voice sharp with urgency. "Buy us time." The volunteer fighters braced themselves, weapons at the ready. They were outnumbered, but they had the element of strategy, a fact that might just tip the scales in their favor. As the battle raged on, Thalia and Taran slipped away, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with the practiced ease of those who'd spent far too long in this metal tomb. "We're close," Thalia said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "The weapons control room should be just ahead." "Let's hope Drex didn't change the locks," Taran quipped, though his eyes were grim. They reached the door, Thalia's heart skipping a beat as she keyed in the override code. For a moment nothing happened. Then, with a hiss of hydraulics, the door slid open. "After you," Taran said, gesturing with mock chivalry. "Such a gentleman," Thalia replied, stepping inside. The room was a hive of technology, consoles humming with untapped potential. "We need to disable it," Thalia said, her mind racing. "If we can just—" The sound of footsteps interrupted her, and for a moment her heart stopped. Drex stood in the doorway, his expression smug, flanked by two of his glowing-eyed acolytes. "Thalia, Thalia, Thalia," he drawled, shaking his head. "You just can't leave well enough alone, can you?" "Well enough," Thalia shot back. "You've got a very different definition of well than I do," Drex chuckled, the sound low and sinister. "It's a shame you can't see the beauty in what we're doing." "Beauty?" Taran interjected, incredulous. "This isn't art, Drex, this is madness." Drex's smile widened like a predator savoring its prey. "Madness is just a point of view." Thalia's mind raced. She needed to find a way to stop him, to end this before it spiraled further into chaos. But how? And then she saw it, a small panel on the far wall, covered in warning labels and what looked suspiciously like a "do not touch" sign. It was risky, hell, it was downright suicidal, but it might just work. Thalia moved, drawing Drex's attention as Taran positioned himself near the panel. "You know, Drex, I always wondered why you were so obsessed with power. Turns out it's because you're compensating for something." That got his attention, Drex's eyes narrowing with barely contained ire. "You think you're clever, Thalia. You're just delaying the inevitable." "Maybe," she replied, keeping her tone light despite the hammering of her heart. "But I've always been a fan of long shots." Taran took the cue, yanking open the panel and ripping at the wires with the kind of reckless abandon usually reserved for action holovids. "No!" Drex shouted, lunging forward, but it was too late. The room shuddered, the lights flickering ominously before plunging them into darkness. A howl of rage erupted from Drex, but Thalia wasn't about to stick around to see what kind of wrath he'd unleash. She grabbed Taran's arm, dragging him towards the exit as chaos erupted behind them. "Run now," she urged, urgency pushing them forward. "Celebrate later." They stumbled out into the corridor, the station groaning ominously as systems overloaded and alarms howled like banshees. "Did we do it?" Taran panted as they sprinted away, the sound of pursuit hot on their heels. "We did something," Thalia replied with a grim smile. "Now let's hope it's enough to buy us some time." They kept running, the corridor stretching out before them like a tunnel with no end. Behind them, Drex's voice rang out, furious and raw, but Thalia refused to look back. For now, they'd won a small victory. Whether it would be enough to turn the tide, she couldn't say. But it was a start. And in a place like Selene 9, even the smallest spark of hope could light the way to something better. "Well, that was exhilarating," Taran wheezed, resting his hands on his knees as they skidded to a halt in yet another dimly lit corridor, the kind that made you long for the warm embrace of blindness. "Exhilarating isn't the word I'd use," Thalia replied, trying to catch her breath. "More like utterly terrifying, but hey, at least we're still in one piece. Mostly. And bonus points for not being molecular pancakes," Taran added with a grin, though it was more grimace than anything else. Thalia leaned against the cold metal wall, her mind a frenzied whirlwind of potential plans. Each tick of time felt like Drex's fan club was gaining ground, and she didn't have the luxury of a misstep. The gravity weapon was temporarily out, but like a bad penny, Drex would be back, and he'd be angry. "So, what now, fearless leader?" Taran's voice was light, but the undercurrent was serious. They were running out of time, and this was no time for hesitation. Thalia glanced at him, her lips twisting into a wry smile. We improvise naturally. I've got an idea, but it's going to require a little creativity. Taran raised an eyebrow. Creativity, isn't that just code for we're screwed? Usually, Thalia admitted. But this time I've got a little something extra. A chink in Drex's armor, if you will. Do tell, Taran encouraged, though he looked like he was bracing for a hurricane of absurdity. Drex's parasite is their Achilles heel, Thalia explained. It's enhanced their charisma, sure, but it's also made them susceptible to specific frequencies. Harmonics, you might say. And how do we exploit that? Taran asked, skepticism lacing his words. We use the station's communication system, she said, the glimmer of an idea sparking in her eyes. We broadcast a counter-frequency, something to disrupt the parasite's hold, turn Drex's followers back into everyday, non-homicidal colonists. Sounds risky, Taran replied. And let me guess, if it doesn't work, we're all dead. Pretty much, Thalia said with a shrug. But it's a better shot than waiting for Drex to come at us with all the subtlety of a battering ram. Great. So how do we make this happen without accidentally frying everyone's brains? Thalia's smile was as sharp as a razor's edge. That's where Kaido comes in. He's been working on stabilizing a compound, right? If we can convince him to help, we can use his expertise to refine the frequency. Taran snorted. Kaido, the guy who treats safety regulations like polite suggestions. This should be fun. Hey, desperate times, Thalia shot back. Let's get moving. The medbay's not going to come to us. They set off at a brisk pace, the air around them tinged with the metallic tang of fear. The medbay was a maze of flickering lights and malfunctioning consoles, its usual sterile efficiency reduced to a shadow of what it once was. Kaido, Thalia called out, her voice echoing off the walls. The man himself appeared from behind a console, his appearance a testament to sleepless nights and questionable hygiene. Thalia, Taran, to what do I owe the pleasure? We need your help, Thalia said without preamble. We've got a plan to disrupt Drex's parasite army, but we need your expertise. Kaido eyed them both, then shrugged. Sure, why not? It's not like I've got anything better to do than save the colony from impending doom. Glad you're on board, Taran said dryly. Now, how do we make this work without accidentally turning everyone into sentient goo? Kaido chuckled, the sound more manic than mirthful. Oh, that's the easy part. We'll just need to fine-tune the harmonic resonance to match the parasite's frequencies. It's like playing a symphony where the instruments are potential death traps. Sounds promising, Thalia muttered, then added louder, Can you do it? Kaido tapped a few keys on the console, the screen flickering in response. With a little time and a lot of luck, sure. But we need to get the station's comm system online first. The three of them worked quickly, fingers flying over controls, eyes scanning screens filled with endless lines of code and data. The tension in the air was thick, each second stretching out like a lifetime. Got it, Kaido said finally, a note of triumph in his voice. We're ready to rock and roll. Just say the word. Do it, Thalia ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Kaido keyed the final command, and the room filled with a low hum, a sound that seemed to resonate in their bones, shaking the very air around them. Here's hoping this works, Taran mumbled, casting a wary glance at the door. Because if it doesn't, Drex is going to be on us faster than a starving rat on a space freighter. The hum intensified, building to a crescendo that seemed to vibrate through the entire station. It was a sound that defied logic, a cacophony of notes that twisted and turned in ways that made the hair on the back of Thalia's neck stand on end. Any second now, Kaido said, eyes fixed on the monitor. For a moment nothing happened. Then, like a wave crashing over a beach, there was a shift, a flicker in the air, a change in the atmosphere. Outside, the infected colonists froze, their movements jerky and disjointed, as if caught in the throes of some unseen battle. It's working, Thalia breathed, barely daring to believe it. Or killing them, Taran commented, ever the optimist. But hey, at least they're not charging at us with killer intent. Now we just have to hope they snap out of it before Drex figures out a counter, Kaido said, his expression grim. And there it was, the reminder that they were far from safe. Drex was still out there and he wouldn't take this lying down. We need to regroup with the others, Thalia said, determination burning in her eyes. We can't let Drex get the upper hand again. They slipped out of the medbay, the station echoing with the distant sounds of confusion and chaos. It was a delicate balance they walked, a tightrope strung between victory and disaster. Think the others held the line? Taran asked as they made their way through the twisting corridors. Knowing them, they've probably turned it into a party by now, Thalia replied with a crooked grin. Let's just hope they saved us some cake. The echoes of conflict grew louder as they neared the makeshift barricade, the sounds of scuffling and shouted orders filling the air. Glad you could join us, a familiar voice called out as they rounded the corner. Ava, one of Thalia's more dependable allies, her expression both relieved and exasperated. We had a few things to take care of, Thalia said, surveying the scene. The volunteer fighters were holding their ground, though they looked worse for wear. Did it work? Ava asked, wiping sweat from her brow. Let's just say we gave Drex's fanbase a little reality check, Taran replied. But it's not over yet. Ava nodded, her gaze flicking to the barricade where the infected colonists were slowly regaining their senses, confusion written across their faces. What's our next move? Ava asked, turning back to Thalia. We need to consolidate our forces, Thalia said, shifting gears into full-on leader mode. With any luck, we've bought ourselves some time. We need to get everyone on the same page before Drex makes his next move. Sounds like a plan, Ava agreed. But it's not going to be easy. People are scared, and scared people make stupid decisions. Then we'll just have to be smarter, Thalia said. Let's round everyone up and see where we stand. As they worked to gather the disparate groups of colonists, Thalia found herself marveling at the ragtag collection of survivors they'd managed to piece together. They were far from perfect, a mix of engineers, technicians, and everyday folks who'd never picked up a weapon before today, but they were united by one common goal: survival. Listen up, everyone, Thalia called out, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. We've dealt Drex a blow, but he's not done yet. We need to stick together because that's the only way we're getting out of this alive. A chorus of agreement rippled through the crowd, though there were still murmurs of dissent and uncertainty. What about Drex's followers? Someone shouted. They'll just go back to him once they shake off whatever you did. Not if we give them a better option, Thalia replied. We need to show them that they don't have to follow Drex's madness. We can rebuild, but we need everyone on board. And how do we do that? Another voice piped up, skeptical and wary. Thalia took a deep breath, knowing full well the weight of what she was about to say. We need to confront Drex, head on, show him that we won't be controlled. If we stand together, we have a chance. If we let him pick us off one by one, we're as good as dead. Silence fell over the crowd, each person contemplating the gravity of her words. It was a gamble, a shot in the dark, but it was all they had. Then let's do it, Ava said, breaking the silence with a note of fierce determination. We've come this far, haven't we? One by one, the others echoed her sentiment, their voices a patchwork of resolve and resolve. They were scared, yes, but they were also ready to fight for their future. All right then, Thalia said, her heart pounding in her chest. Let's make Drex regret ever thinking he could take this station from us. The plan was set in motion, each person taking up their role with a grim sense of purpose. It was an uphill battle, but they were nothing if not resilient. As they moved out, Thalia felt a small, fragile thread of hope weaving its way through the fear and uncertainty. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. The corridors seemed to stretch on forever as they made their way toward Drex's last known location, the tension a constant companion. Hey, Taran said, bumping her shoulder companionably. Think we'll live to see another emergency drill? Thalia laughed, the sound both surprised and genuine. If we do, I'm never complaining about them again. Duly noted, Taran said with a grin, though his eyes were serious. In all seriousness, whatever happens, I'm glad we're in it together. Likewise, Thalia replied, the weight of their shared experience heavy on her shoulders. Now let's go show Drex what we're made of. As they approached the final stretch, the air crackled with the anticipation of what was to come. It was the calm before the storm, the breath before the plunge. And whatever awaited them on the other side, Thalia knew one thing for sure. They'd face it together, for better or worse. The corridor stretched out before them, a ribbon of uncertainty, and they stepped forward, resolute in their defiance. For Selene 9, for their future, for each other, they'd fight until the end. The dimly lit corridor seemed more like a death march than a dramatic climax. Thalia, Taran, and the ragtag band of colonists, hardly the crack team of space warriors, were putting one foot in front of the other, striding toward Drex's last known hideout. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of someone who'd skipped a few showers too many. Anyone else feel like they're marching to their doom? Taran piped up, breaking the silence with his usual brand of gallows humor. Or is that just the smell of despair mixed with whatever that is? Shut up and keep moving, Thalia replied, though she couldn't suppress a small smirk. We're almost there. Almost where? The part where we're all horribly killed by Drex's deranged fan club, Taran shot back, though he was grinning. Optimism looks good on you, Taran, Thalia quipped. Really brings out the color of your eyes. Ava, keeping pace beside them, rolled her eyes. Focus, you two. We've got a megalomaniac to deal with. As they reached the final bend before Drex's lair, Thalia paused, taking a deep breath. The plan was simple as plans go when they involve alien parasites, manic followers, and the risk of everything going horribly wrong. But it was all they had. All right, everyone, Thalia said, turning to face the group. Remember what we practiced. Stick to the plan, and for the love of whatever deity you believe in, don't go rogue. Don't die, don't improvise, and try not to make things worse. Got it, Taran recapped cheerily. The group nodded, and Thalia pushed open the door to Drex's hideout with the sort of determination usually reserved for people trying to finish a marathon with a bad hangover. Inside, the room was a chaotic blend of high-tech equipment and low-tech fervor. Drex stood at the center, looking like a man who just realized his favorite toy was about to be taken away. And around him, his infected followers, eyes glazed with a mix of fanaticism and confusion, were trying to figure out if they were supposed to be angry or just dazed. Drex, Thalia said, stepping forward, her voice carrying the weight of authority she had no right to possess but wore like a crown anyway. It's over. We've disrupted your little parasite symphony. Drex turned slowly, and Thalia could swear she saw the gears grinding in his parasite-enhanced mind. Ah, Thalia, the ever-persistent thorn in my side. I should have known you'd be at the forefront of this. Rebellion. Rebellion's a strong word, Taran chimed in. I'd go with strongly worded disagreement. Drex's lips twisted into a sneer. You think you've won because you've stirred a little confusion. The parasites are adaptable. They'll overcome your interference. Maybe, Thalia admitted, her tone cool. But not today. Today they get a taste of human ingenuity, crafted by desperation and a lack of better options. With a nod to Kaido, who was manning the makeshift control panel they dragged along, Thalia gave the signal. Kaido grinned like a kid in a candy store, fingers flying over the keys. Let's see how you like this. The station's speakers crackled to life, the air thrumming with an ominous hum, a counter-frequency designed to scramble the parasite's hold without frying anyone's brain. In theory, it should work. In practice, well, they'd find out. The infected colonists staggered, clutching their heads as though the world had suddenly tilted on its axis. Faces once twisted with zeal slackened, eyes clearing as the parasite's grip faltered. Drex, sensing the shift, let out a roar of frustration, the sound echoing off the walls like the death knell of his egomaniacal dream. You think this changes anything? Yeah, Thalia replied, stepping closer. I think it changes everything. As if to punctuate her point, one of Drex's closest sycophants, a burly man with shoulders like a bulldozer, blinked, rubbing his eyes as if waking from a nightmare. "What? What happened?" "Welcome back to reality," Taran said, offering the man a sardonic two-finger salute. "Hope you enjoyed your stay in Crazy Town." The burly man looked at Drex, confusion giving way to anger. "You did this to us," he ground out, stepping forward with fists clenched. "Wait," Drex said, holding up his hands. "I can explain." But explanations weren't on the agenda as more followers shook off the parasite-induced haze, their expressions turning from bewilderment to betrayal. Whatever charisma Drex had wielded, bolstered by extraterrestrial interference, was unraveling faster than a budget spacewalk suit. Thalia watched as the tide turned, a small, hard knot of satisfaction settling in her gut. They had done it. They had actually done it. "Now's our chance," she said, motioning for Ava and the others to move in. While they are distracted, with Drex's control waning, the colonists moved to disarm and secure the remaining loyalists, who were now looking less like a threatening mob and more like a bunch of lost tourists. Drex, however, wasn't about to go quietly into that good night. With a desperate look in his eyes, he lunged for the nearest console. "Oh no, you don't," Taran said, diving after him with all the grace of a space penguin. He tackled Drex, the two of them hitting the floor with a resounding thud. "Get off me, you idiot," Drex snarled, struggling beneath Taran's weight. "Not until you promise to stop being a complete lunatic," Taran shot back, pinning Drex's arms while making a face like he just smelled something unpleasant. "Seriously, what have you been eating?" Thalia moved in, helping Taran secure Drex with a pair of handcuffs they'd borrowed from the security office earlier. Drex struggled, but it was the feeble thrashing of a man who knew he'd lost. "Looks like your grand plan didn't quite pan out," Thalia said, standing over him. Drex glared up at her, defiance mingling with a grudging respect. "This isn't over, Thalia. Others will come." "They'll see the potential, maybe," Thalia conceded, "but they'll have to get through us first." With Drex subdued and his followers either secured or shaking off the last remnants of their indoctrination, the room settled into a tense calm. Thalia looked around at the faces of her fellow colonists, battered but unbroken. "All right, folks," she said, drawing their attention. "We've got a lot of work to do. Let's get this station back in order." The colonists nodded, their resolve firming as they realized that their lives and their future were finally back in their hands. It was a monumental task ahead, but damn if they weren't ready to face it head-on. As the dust began to settle, Thalia caught Taran's eye. He was grinning, a stupidly triumphant look on his face, and she couldn't help but grin back. "We did it," he said, brushing a hand through his hair with the air of someone who just survived a particularly nasty roller coaster. "Yeah," Thalia replied, "we did. And maybe, just maybe, Selene 9 would be better for it. A little bruised, a lot wiser, but still standing. And in the end, that was all that really mattered." As the colony began to regroup and rebuild, Thalia felt a flicker of something she hadn't dared to hope for in a long time, a future. For the first time in a while, she let herself believe it was possible. "This calls for a drink," Taran declared, clapping Thalia on the back. "Or several. Around here. Who's treating?" Ava chimed in, joining them with a smirk. "We'll charge it to Drex's account," Thalia decided with a laugh, feeling lighter than she had in ages. "He owes us, after all." And as they walked away from the chaos and toward whatever came next, they did so together, united not just by the struggle behind them but by the promise of a new beginning. For better or worse, they were a team. A motley, mismatched, improbably determined team. And for now, that was enough. The aftermath of Drex's downfall settled over Selene 9 like an awkward silence at a bad dinner party. The kind where everyone knows the host is about to announce bankruptcy or an affair, and the chicken's overcooked to boot. But unlike those dinners, this one involved less chicken and more existential dread. "Well, that was fun," Taran declared, stretching his arms over his head as if he just finished a light workout rather than a rebellion against a parasite-infested megalomaniac. "Who's ready to go back to pretending the water recycler isn't a piece of junk?" Thalia shot him a sidelong glance. You volunteering to fix it? Me. I'm more of a moral support kind of guy, Taran replied, flashing a grin that could light up even the dimmest corridor, though not enough to make anyone feel particularly better about the water recycler. Ava snorted, adjusting the makeshift bandage on her arm. Yeah, because moral support is exactly what we need when we're knee-deep in mechanical failures. There was a murmur of agreement from the other colonists, who were busy picking up the pieces of their fractured lives. The once manic throng of Drex's followers now stood around looking like they'd collectively misplaced a very important set of keys. All right, everyone, Thalia called, clapping her hands to draw their attention. We've got a station to get back in order. And no, Taran, that doesn't mean you can supervise from the comfort of your usual lurking spot. Taran feigned a look of deep offense. My lurking spot is an essential part of our social ecosystem. Thalia just shook her head, turning her attention to the task at hand. They had to assess the state of the station, figure out what damage had been done during Drex's little escapade, and make sure the parasites were officially out of the picture. It was a tall order, but if there was one thing Thalia knew, it was that humans were nothing if not resilient. Stubborn, too, and often infuriatingly so, but resilient first and foremost. As the colonists dispersed to their various stations, Thalia allowed herself a moment to reflect on the roller coaster of chaos they'd just survived. It wasn't every day you toppled a wannabe dictator using a frequency found on an ancient playlist titled White Noise for Sleeping. She chuckled to herself at the absurdity of it all. Hey, Ava said, nudging her gently. You okay? Thalia shrugged. As okay as one can be after playing hero in a sci-fi comedy of errors. Ava's lips quirked up in a slight smile. At least we've got our gallows humor game on point. True, Thalia conceded. Besides, I think it's a prerequisite for living on this station. They wandered the corridors, passing colonists who were already hard at work repairing what they could. The air was still tinged with the metallic scent of sweat and adrenaline, but there was an undercurrent of hope now, a fragile thing that could be snuffed out by the next malfunction if they weren't careful. You think Drex's little escapade will have any lasting effects? Ava asked, her tone pragmatic as always. Hard to say, Thalia replied, glancing around. I'd like to think we've learned something from it, though. Like what? How to not follow the first charismatic lunatic who promises us the moon, Thalia chuckled. Yeah, that'd be a start, and maybe to trust our own instincts a bit more rather than waiting for someone else to swoop in and save the day. Ava nodded thoughtfully. We've got the people and the know-how. If we can just get our act together, maybe we can make this place livable. Or at least not imminently deadly, Thalia added dryly. They continued their rounds, checking in with the different teams. Kaido was busy in the medbay, tinkering with the console that had been sending out Drex's sermons on loop. He greeted them with a tired wave, a smudge of grease on his forehead making him look like a beleaguered mechanic instead of the station's chief medical officer. How's it going in here? Thalia asked, surveying the organized chaos. Kaido sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. Better now that we're not accidentally broadcasting Drex's greatest hits to half the colony. I'm sure they'll miss his dulcet tones, Taran quipped, leaning against the doorframe. Only if they take up masochism as a hobby, Kaido replied with a smirk. I'm just glad we caught it before it managed to disrupt anything else. Let us know if you need anything, Thalia said, nodding to Kaido before they resumed their rounds. In the aftermath of the rebellion, everyone seemed to find solace in work. The station might have been a clunky death trap, but it was their clunky death trap. And if they could bring it back from the brink, maybe they could bring themselves back too. As the day slipped into night, though night on a space station was more a matter of dimming the lights than the sun going down, Thalia found herself in the control room, overlooking the now quiet corridors. Taran ambled in, hands stuffed in his pockets. Penny for your thoughts. That's about all they're worth, Thalia replied, cracking a tired smile. Just thinking about what comes next. More of the same, I'd wager, Taran said, leaning against the console. Fixing things, trying not to die in increasingly bizarre ways, avoiding another round of galactic karaoke with Drex. Sounds about right, Thalia agreed. But maybe this time we can actually make some progress. Taran fell silent, studying her with a kind of grudging admiration. You know, for someone who got thrust into all this, you're not half bad at it. At what? Not panicking when things go sideways. That, and keeping us all from going completely nuts. Thalia chuckled. That's not entirely true. I have it on good authority that insanity is still high on the list of potential outcomes. But at least we'll be crazy together, Taran pointed out. Yeah, Thalia said softly, gazing out at the stars beyond. Together. As the quiet settled in, the weight of leadership pressed down on Thalia's shoulders like a reluctant companion. She hadn't asked for this, hadn't wanted to be the one everyone looked to when things went south. But if there was one thing she'd learned, it was that life rarely cared about what you wanted, and maybe that was okay. Maybe it was better not to get what you wanted all the time. After all, life would be boring otherwise. Taran, she said, pulling away from the console and turning to face him. We can't afford to rest on our laurels. He arched an eyebrow. Who said anything about laurels? I'm just trying to find a functional coffee machine. Thalia laughed, the sound ringing through the room. We'll put that on the to-do list. Right after save the station from imminent collapse. Good priorities, Taran agreed. But seriously, what's the plan? In case Drex Part 2 comes knocking. Thalia considered this, her gaze drifting to the stars beyond the window. We make sure we're stronger than before. Fix the station, build alliances, and make sure no one else gets any bright ideas about parasites or power plays. Sounds like a plan, Taran said, nodding. Though I suppose we should also figure out who's handling the next round of mysterious space parasites. I'd say we put that under future Thalia's problem, she replied. Taran grinned. I like the way you think. Thalia returned the smile, feeling lighter than she had in ages. Despite the chaos, the uncertainty, and the ever-present threat of malfunctioning tech, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe Selene 9 could be more than just a footnote in a series of governmental screw-ups. Maybe it could become a place where people not only survived but thrived. We'll figure it out, she said firmly, meeting Taran's gaze. Together, he nodded, his expression softer than usual. Together. And as they stood there, two mismatched pieces in a puzzle they hadn't asked to be part of, Thalia allowed herself to believe in the future. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be perfect, but it would be theirs. As the lights dimmed to indicate the station's version of night, the colonists settled into an uneasy peace. But it was a peace they had earned, and one they were determined to keep. Thalia knew the path ahead wouldn't be smooth, but for the first time she didn't mind. Because whatever lay ahead, they'd face it as a team. And for now, that was more than enough.